Kia ora and welcome to another online tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about pedigree charts. Specifically, what are they? What do the symbols mean? How do we use them? And what can we actually infer from a pedigree chart? So to start it off, just to put into a simple summary, a pedigree chart is a diagram that shows inheritance patterns of a certain trait. So we can see a certain trait and how it's inherited through a series of generations. Okay? And we usually use that to predict a parent's genotype. So, what do the symbols mean? In our pedigree charts, you'll see a lot of squares and circles. Squares typically denote a male, circles denote a female, and we can have those coloured in or left blank. Now, sometimes these are referred to as affected or unaffected, okay, and that just shows if they have or don't have a specific trait. Okay, so these can be used to show what phenotype these individuals have. Okay, so if you get a coloured in square, you have a male with that particular phenotype that's stated in the question, and same for a female, or vice versa, you don't. On our pedigree charts, you'll see lines. These show that these two have bred, and a line coming off that shows their offspring, their children. Okay. Now, a reminder that in pedigree charts, the only individuals that we're 100% sure or certain of their genotype are those who are expressing the recessive genotype or the recessive phenotype, because we know they only have the recessive gene. So, let's look at an example. I've taken an example from the question aping around in the 2011 exam, looking at albino apes. We've got 4 generations on a pedigree chart here. Okay, I've gone ahead and just drawn some stuff on the side to make it a little bit easier for us to know what's going on. Our coloured in individuals are our normal apes. Our white individuals, very fittingly in this one, are our albino apes. Okay, now they've told us in the question, for this particular trait, our coloured in individuals, our big N is present, our dominant allele or our dominant gene is present, that's normal. And they've said that the gene or allele for albinism is recessive. Okay, so the only individuals in this Punnett Square of whom we know the genotype 100% are any albino examples, because we know they only have the recessive allele. Okay, so in the question, 2011 question 2, it asks us, how can we use a pedigree chart to show the albinism is really a recessive trait? Now, we talked about it before, saying that we can use it to tell the genotype or infer the genotype of parents. Okay, so here there's a lot of stuff going on. It kind of goes against our understanding of Punnett squares, but here we get a nice example. So I've marked this one with an X, and we're going to use this as our example. Okay, so this is the individual of whom I think there's a nice distribution amongst their siblings, but is also homozygous recessive, okay, little n, so we know that they're an albino, we know they only have the recessive trait. So I know when I do a Punnett square for these parents that a recessive trait is going to be present. So let's have a look at that. So again, a reminder that the recessive trait or the recessive gene for that trait must be present, because our individual in the previous one has albinism, which we've been told is recessive. So it must have the genotype little n, meaning that the parents have to have that gene present too. You can't pass on a gene that you don't have. Okay, so we're going to draw a we've used our pedigree chart. Now we're going to draw a Punnett square to prove that. Okay, so we know that the recessive gene, the recessive allele, has to be present. Okay, but the parents aren't albino, so we know they must be heterozygous, because they've got to have the recessive, but they're not albino, so they must have the dominant allele too. So I'm going to quickly do a little Punnett square, and we're going to look at the genotypical chances, the phenotypical chances or probability of both of these, and what takeaways and inferences we can have from that. So let me run down. Big N, I'm going to come across big N. Now I'm going to do my recessives, little n, coming across little n. Okay, remember that each of these squares are a 25% chance in our Punnett square. I can come across and I can see, cool, what are the chances of a heterozygous? I've got 2, so 50%. What are my chances of a homozygous dominant? I've got 1, 25%. Okay, and what are my chances of a homozygous recessive? 25%. Cool, that's my genotype chance. I know that these two here both have the dominant gene present, okay, the gene that's going to determine that they're not albinos. So I'm going to add these two together to get my phenotype chance of 75% of offspring for this potential couple, or the likelihood of that would be normal. And there's a 25% chance that they're albino. Okay, we can do a quick sanity check. Does that fit our previous question? So we can have here, yeah, we got 25% and 75%, so it's looking good. Okay, so what can we actually infer? Okay, so we can infer that there is a 75% chance of the organisms having normal or non-albino phenotypes. Okay, and a 25% chance, if albinism is recessive, that they'll be albino. If it was the other way around and albinism was dominant, okay, we would have a 75% chance. All these ones have little n's, okay, they all have the gene for it, and we would see majority of the offspring being albino. Okay, we don't see that in our particular example. Okay, you may up here though, so we're going to dodge that one, right? But we're going to talk about why. So we can say, using our pedigree chart and using a Punnett square to prove it, we can say, well, we think that there's a strong chance albinism is recessive because it matches the probability. But some questions arise, okay? It's all just chance. 25% chance of albinism, you could have 100 albino kids in a row. It would be very unlikely, but it could occur, okay? So our takeaways are, using our example, it's very likely that our recessive gene is present. Okay. We can also say that if these people here, or these apes, sorry, these apes had the recessive genes, okay, if it was the other way around and albinism was dominant and being normal was recessive, and they had all the recessives, there's no way you could have an albino child, because they'd be only recessive and all their children would be only recessive. There'd be pure breeding. Okay. So we know that's not the case, so we can say that we know that it's to normal is dominant. And then we can back it up with a probability by looking at our example, saying, cool, yep, 25% chance of having the albino phenotype and genotype. That matches what we have here. Okay. So inferences we can make, we can infer the parent's genotype. We can say we know the recessive allele must be present, because otherwise, how has the child got the recessive genes? Okay. We can infer that the parents must be heterozygous because they have passed on the recessive gene, but they're expressing the dominant gene. Okay, and we can infer the chances. Cool. So that's how we use a Punnett square and pedigree chart in combination to prove if something is recessive or not. Okay. Now again, a big takeaway is that it is all just chance. All right, and often they ask a question: how can you be sure of your findings? And the answer is always the same. If you're unsure, make more babies. Okay. Hopefully this has been helpful. What have we looked at? We've looked at pedigree charts, what they are, what our symbols mean, how do we use them, and what we can infer. Get out there, team. I'd heavily recommend giving a few NCEA questions involving Punnett squares and pedigree charts a shot, and checking your answers, seeing if you're doing all right, using this as a template to work through it if you get really stuck. Good luck.